Well, it's week 4. It's Tuesday of week 4. So I didn't want to break tradition and not have a video to start the week off with, and I realize it's a little bit late, but we haven't had too many people submit assignments yet, so I think we'll get most of people before you begin too much. Okay, week 4 information that I would like to give you is if you have not looked through the lessons coming up and the assignments that are going to be due, week 4 you have your second major project, and each of these projects is worth 20% of your final grade, which is a really big chunk. So I want you to be prepared for that. Pace yourself. Don't wait till the last minute to do the project. Make sure that you understand all of the requirements. Make sure you read that grading rubric so you know how you're going to be graded. The nice thing is, with the assignments for week 4, the textbook assignments, you will have had plenty of practice using Excel, making graphs, learning how to create correlations so that when you do your project, it won't be new to you. And let me just briefly, if you haven't read anything about week 4, it's about something called correlations, and you've seen that word. In fact, some of you chose news articles for last week, the visual display week, that were talking about correlations. In fact, you can't really read a medical study hardly anymore where they're not talking about correlations, but this is about studying correlations, which are connections between two things, trying to see how strongly two things are connected or weakly, to see if there's a positive connection, a negative connection, and if it's close enough, you can predict what the value will be. So some things that have a real positive correlation occur in nature. For instance, if you took somebody's height, so if I took a list of students and I collected their height and then I collected their shoe size, those have a very strong positive correlation. In fact, usually in my regular stats classes, we do this as an experiment. That's what we call a positive correlation. Each dot in a scatter plot represents a person. And so in a correlation study, you are asking your people, or you're gathering data from your subjects, if they're not people, 2 sets of quantitative information. So you would ask each person, what's your shoe size, what's your height? And you would graph those 2 quantitative measures on the graph, and that's how you get your scatter plots. If those dots seem to be following a pattern, an uphill trend, then that's what a correlation is. A positive correlation means they're going uphill. A negative correlation would mean they're going downhill. And if they're all scattered all over, then that's a visual for no correlation. You're going to read all about it. You're going to have great graphs in the book to look at. This is just so that as I continue talking about the project, if you haven't looked yet, so that you kind of have an idea what's going on. So your project needs to be global themed. That's why last week I had you start playing around with gapminder.org, because that's a great resource to find what we call raw data, which is columns and columns of numbers that you can graph. And so you're going to come up with a global theme. And I think I gave the example of maybe you want to choose, and you have to choose at least 20 countries or regions that you're going to talk about. How you want to choose them is up to you, but keep in mind good sampling methods. So you're going to pick a bunch of different countries, country A, B, C, and think of what data you're going to collect. That's where Gapminder comes in the data tab. You can, they list columns of data in Excel spreadsheets for a lot of things. So you might want to see, this is exactly what Hans Rosling did, how literacy rates compare with incomes, median incomes of those countries. So for each country, you would collect a number for the literacy rate and a number for the income, and then you would graph them on the scatter plot, okay? So what I want you to do with your project, number 1, you're going to make predictions. What do you think you're going to see based on just information you hear in the news or just your general knowledge? What do you think you're going to see? Then you're actually going to do your statistical analysis. You're going to graph it. You're going to get a mathematical unit called a correlation coefficient that's going to tell you whether or not these two are connected and how strongly they're connected. and then you'll kind of come up with your conclusion. So your project is doing studies just like that. And they have to have a global theme. You have to have 3 of these correlations, but you can repeat concepts. So if you wanted to study literacy rates and income, that would be one correlation. You could then study literacy rates and maybe average lifespan. And then you could even then compare average lifespan to income. So you don't have to create like 6 completely different measures for these 20 countries. But I do want you to stick with the same 20 countries and then just choose your measures. But you're going to pair each at a time. So one correlation would be literacy to income. One correlation would be literacy to lifespan. And your third correlation could be lifespan to income. And those would be your 3 correlations. Each one you're going to do a graph for and slides for and things like that. Okay, since I've just given you those 3 as examples, of course you cannot use them. On Gapminder, the countries are listed alphabetically, and some countries there's not a lot of data for, and so you may have to choose. In fact, you will want to choose a particular year, and so find a year that you have a lot of data for. So earlier years there's not a lot of data for. Oh, that's another thing I want to mention. Years like 1971, 72, 73, that's not quantitative data. It's actually time data. So that cannot be one of the values that you're collecting. Okay, so don't think of years as a column of numbers that you're going to compare to anything. The other thing is when you're comparing information like literacy, you have to do it as a rate. Or particularly like crime, if you want to look at crime of different countries, you cannot look at crime numbers, like how many total murders are committed, because more populous countries will always have more murders than tiny little countries. That's not because they're more violent, it's because that's just sheer numbers. But you have to do it per capita. Crime rate per capita is a meaningful statistic. So keep that in mind. If you're not sure if your data, in fact, one of your assignments is that you have to give me your data ahead of time so that we can correct for issues like that if you have any, rather than wait till the last minute and then, if your data is wrong, your project's bad. So we'll baby step you through all this. Keep in mind that your project has to be a PowerPoint with voice recording. I told you that already. Make sure you read the details in the grading rubric provided so you know everything that's expected of you and how it's going to be graded. Okay, some information about week 5 ahead of time. The last day of class is June 14th, which is next Friday. And all of our other weeks, for the most part, the last assignment was due on Sunday night. Well, obviously we can't do that for week 5 because the class is over on Friday. So all the due dates for week 5 have been shifted back 2 days into a Monday through Friday due date scheme. So I wanted you to be aware of that ahead of time. It's not a lot of in-depth assignments due on Friday because everything you're doing Friday is working towards your final research project. So I just wanted to let you know ahead of time. Let me scoot all this up. This will make more sense. If you haven't read anything about correlations, this will make more sense as you get into it. But I want to make one mention that's kind of an argument that's incorrect that a lot of people use, so I want you to be aware of it. Okay, if I do a correlation study between study time or preparation time and grade on a final exam. And each one is, so these aren't great dots, but it's kind of hard to do on this little iPad. All right, so this is how my scatter plot came out. Okay, I would say from this scatter plot, you can visually see those lines are following an uphill trend kind of around that green line. I'm going to add a couple in here. Okay, a lot of times people will look at that or hear a presentation and say, well, there's not a positive correlation between study time and grade because you can have somebody who studies a long time but still makes a low grade. Or you could have somebody that doesn't study long at all and makes a high grade. If you're saying that, you're not talking about whether or not a correlation is true. My dog is trying to add her opinion. You're talking about outliers. Just because you can name somebody that doesn't follow the trend doesn't negate the correlation. And people will use that as an argument against correlation all the time. They'll say, no, there's no correlation because you can have somebody that does this or that. What you're referring to are outliers. And I can't even tell you how many meetings I've been in where I have had people say, no, there's no correlation. We can't use that measure because, and then what they'll do is say, because of these outliers. But again, that doesn't prove there's no correlation. It just means there are outliers. The other thing I want to make sure that you understand is that correlation is not a comparison study. So you're not comparing two things. So your study is not comparing U.S. and China to see over the years which one has had the biggest growth or a decrease in lifespan or something like that. That's a comparison study. That would be comparing two things. Sometimes I'll have students say, I want to do my project on what type of students make better grades on the final exam, male or female. That's comparing two things. It's not a correlation study. So keep that in mind. Once you've done the homework and you've started to work with Excel, you generally understand what data is involved, what's going to work and what's not. So that's the nice thing about the homework. Not that there's any really nice things most people find about the homework, but once you've practiced it, you're less likely to kind of make errors with that. Okay, that's all I have to say. If you have questions, feel free to ask. And I look forward to seeing your projects.